Hello, everyone. This is the lecture part of the Reformation. If you weren't able to get it on the class meeting, um, we are going to talk about the Reformation. The Reformation is when the Protestant Christian religion split from the Catholic Church. Okay, this all began again with the Plague. Due to Europe losing 50% of its population due to the Black Plague, um, and the church, and the fact that the church was unable to do anything at all, um, especially giving the sacraments and the last rites, a lot of people lost their faith in the Catholic Church and the Pope. They didn't necessarily lose their faith in God, but they did lose their faith and their belief that the Catholic Church and the Pope had power over their salvation or their ability to go to heaven. Because the Pope didn't act very well, didn't lead the people properly during the Black Plague, a lot of people saw his power diminished. It saw his power weakened. People turned also had to turn to new inventions due to the lack of manpower because so many people died to help them with new labors. So you had people inventing new ways of making cloth, like the water wheel, and they would make manpower water powered looms. Um, if you've ever been to Silver City and you've seen them use uh, the water wheel at the wood shop in order to cut wood. It was a very similar situation. Uh, also, and one of the newest inventions, of course, was the printing press. That way, they can make new books. Um, Due to the ability of these new machines to allow people to due to the ability for people to use these machines and get more work done, it gave them free time. So in that free time, people started to study different things. Especially a lot of them learned how to read in their native language. So they were reading books and stuff that uh, were written uh, by other people. So if you had a German, he would read German. He would read from other German authors. And so they started to learn new ideas and stuff from these new books. However, the Bible during this time period was not printed in native language, it was printed in Latin. Latin was mostly only spoken by the nobles and the kings and the priests during this time period. So they were unable to, most peasants, most common people weren't able to read the Bible. Also, the Black Plague gave peasants more power. Because so many nobles died, a lot of peasants were able to break free of their servitude towards the lords, and they were able to start earning money for their work. So they could go from one lord to another and say, "Hey, the lord down the road's offering 10 silver. We feel that is cheap. Could you offer us 12, 15 silver?" And if that nobleman was willing to pay, then the peasants would work, which meant that nobleman was able to make more money in the long run. So the peasants kind of had what was called bargaining power, and it gave them for the first time a sense of self entitlement. And with that entitlement, that self knowing, they started to question their own spiritual faith. So during this time period, the people began to question the church and started to break away from the church. However, of course, we know that the church did not like this, so they made the Inquisition to take out these heretics or the people who did not follow the church. One of the groups that you can remember reading about were the Cathars. They were in France and they started to question the church. Well, they sent the Inquisition out there and killed, like, what was it, 20,000 people in a single day due to heresy. Um, they also started questioning indulgences. Indulgence was a process of a person could buy a piece of paper. Um, and that piece of paper, if the person paid enough money, could buy their way out of any sin. Yes, even murder. If you had murdered somebody, you could buy your way out of sin. And with that piece of paper, if you paid enough gold or enough silver, you could still go to heaven, even if you committed murder. The church also had abuse of power. Um, Even if you were a good Christian and you didn't commit any sins, but for some reason your priest did not like you, he could say you're still not going to heaven. Um, there are also bribes taken by the church. There are also other illegal activities that we would consider it illegal today that the church did. Um, a lot of them we can't discuss in class just because of the how inappropriate they were. Um, the people started to see this abuse of power as not okay. So they started questioning, well, if you're committing all these sins and all these criminal activities, do you really have the right to tell me whether or not I'm going to heaven or hell? And also, a lot of your intellectual people, the people who could read, didn't like the fact that the church controlled the education. They had most of the universities. Remember during the plague, whenever we said that the church could decide what medicines were to be used and not used, and that they believed that the demons were the ones causing this. Well, there were large groups of people who realized that it wasn't demons and that it was some sort of disease, and that there were ways of making a person better. And the church saw these ways as witchcraft and prevented people from using them in order to heal the sick. And so a lot of people started questioning whether or not the church had the people's best interest at heart. And so one of the first people that started to question the church was Martin Luther. This guy here, not this one here. Martin Luther King was, of course, named after Martin Luther. But Martin Luther was a guy, a merchant, who was on his way to a city to trade his goods. And when a lightning storm came up, and he got struck by lightning, and he said, "If I was to survive, Lord," and he was praying to a saint at this time, and he said, "Please protect me, and I will become a servant of you." And so he became a monk because he survived. It's because he had the money, and he did have the um, education, he went to university to become a priest, which is called a seminary, where he started to read the Bible. And when he read the Bible, he realized that a lot of the things that the church were doing and saying weren't in the Bible at all. And he believed that the Bible was the written rules that everyone should follow in their religion. And he was seeing that a lot of the things that the church had enacted were contradicting the Bible itself, especially that of indulgences. He saw various forms of corruption within the church, which contradicted the Bible's teaching. So he wrote all of these questions, these contradictions down on a piece of paper called the 95 Theses, and then he nailed it to the church wall in Wittenberg. The church wall during this time acted like a bulletin board, and when you had questions and stuff that you wanted to talk about, you would nail it to the wall. So that's what he did. Well, if it was nailed to the wall, the church would have to address what was written, and the church did address. But let's talk about what his new ideas were. Martin Luther's new ideas were that man is in charge of his own salvation, not the church. His relationship with God is what we'll say is how he gets into heaven or hell, not somebody else. He believed that everyone should be able to study the Bible and that the Bible shouldn't be exclusive just to a noble ranking or upper class simply because it was written in a different language. So he believed that the Bible should be written in any language, especially that of German, French, and English. Uh, he believed that anyone can be baptized in the name of God and could preach the gospel, meaning they could preach the word of God. Um, and that was any man could. It wasn't until the 20th century, ladies, until that you were really able to start preaching. You had some exceptions in uh, the new colonies, especially with Rhode Island being made. There was a young lady who preached against the Puritans, and they exiled her, and she formed the new colony of Rhode Island. But he also believed that a person could directly pray to God and wouldn't need saints to act as a middleman. So again, this is kind of his own words about how one should pray to God. Now, the church response. The church sent Martin Luther to what was called the Deed of Worms. No, they didn't eat. It's not diet, it's diet, is the way it's pronounced. And Martin Luther, it was a court case, and they tried Martin Luther with heresy. Remember, someone who did not believe in the church teachings? Martin Luther simply would not deny his questions and would not step away from them. Matter of fact, throughout the entire trial, his conviction for his new truths became stronger. His belief in what what his own sayings were became stronger, and due to that, Martin Luther was exiled and uh, was called an outlaw, ripe for punishment by the Holy Roman Emperor. Now, it was the Holy Roman Emperor who made Martin Luther an outlaw publicly, but the Holy Roman Emperor privately believed what Martin Luther was saying. But if the Holy Roman Emperor did not persecute Martin Luther, then he would be at civil war with his own country. So publicly, he had to make this decree. But the emperor, uh, got in contact with what was called the Elector Count of Saxony, or the governor of the area of Saxony, and he had him kidnap Martin Luther, and they put Martin Luther in a castle or a big mansion, and they would actually pay Martin Luther to transcribe the Bible into German, English, and French. Uh, then they used the new printing press to print those Bibles, the Gutenberg Bible, and sent them all over Europe so that everybody could learn to read the Bible. And then they started printing pamphlets, spreading new ideas of the new Christian religion, which they called Protestant. And Protestant means to protest. So they were protesting the Catholic Church, and so they use these pamphlets to spread the word of the new Protestant religion. The printing press again uh, allowed them to print the Bible 10 times faster than what the Catholics could. The Catholics didn't use the printing press at this time. And so the German, French, and English Bibles uh, became more prevalent than the Latin Bibles. And therefore, the Protestant religion spread a lot faster in Europe than what the Catholics could keep under control. It spread so fast that the Catholics had no way of preventing it. It outran the Inquisition, and so there was no way of putting out this fire that was the Protestant religion. It spread through Switzerland, Scotland, Hungary, England, other places. Lutherans became a new Protestant religion, which follows Lutheran himself. You have Calvinists who believed that your salvation was preordained, and you were either going to go to heaven or hell um, before you were even born. And this preordainment meant that, you know, you were meant to follow the church or you weren't meant to follow the church. You had the Anabaptists, which were the Amish. You had Methodists. You had the Anglican Church in England, and we'll talk about that more tomorrow. And then you had the Puritans, the Pilgrims. Um, the Protestants were mostly peasants because it gave them a new freedom. It allowed them to break from the Catholic Church, who had controlled them in fear for so many years. Noblemen did tend to remain Catholic because their power came from the king, and well, if their king stayed Catholic, so did they. Unlike in England, where the king would become Protestant, a lot of the nobles would then switch to Protestant. It really depended on who your king was. If he was Protestant, you were Protestant. If he was Catholic, you were Catholic. Um, so it really did kind of cause a wedge to be placed between the nobles and the Protestants, or I'm sorry, the peasants. And so you would have a lot of wars. You had what was called the Peasants' Wars, because they wanted to completely um, break free from uh, the Catholic Church. And this breaking free would later on lead to the revolutions of like France, England, and the United States as they became their own countries without kings because the kings were made Catholic. Um, so as you can see here, this is a list of all the wars throughout Europe that were caused due to the Protestant Reformation. You will see that it stops about 1712, but really the Protestant fighting continued well throughout the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. Earlier this week, when we listened to the song Zombie, we talked about the troubles in Ireland. The troubles in Ireland were, even though it was England versus Ireland, England is a Protestant country. They're the church, the Anglican church. The Irish were Catholic, and they did not want to have a Protestant government controlling their Catholic ways. So it caused a lot of war, especially with the IRA, and them seeking to be completely free from England's tyranny. We will talk more about that tomorrow when we talk about King Henry VIII and his six wives. Um, it'll be an interesting story. I haven't got it put. I haven't got the lesson put up yet, and that's simply because I'm having to make do with it being appropriate for kids. So tomorrow will be a very scandalous lesson. So stay tuned and have a good day and be safe.